The padlock was on the ground. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the blood, not the bodies we'd find later, not the sound Reese made when she saw what was in the command room. The padlock, a military-grade master lock 6271, shackles severed clean, lying in the gravel like a discarded tooth. Somebody had cut it. Somebody had been here before us, and the door to the bunker, a facility that didn't exist on any map I'd ever seen, was 3 inches ajar. I need to go back to tell this right. My name is Joel Marin, 31 years old, former park ranger for the Shoshone National Forest, and for the last 47 days, a man with one job: keep 4 people alive. Those 4 people were behind me when I found the lock. Reese Calloway, who I'd known since college, who had a torn ACL and a .38 revolver with 9 rounds left. Danny Young, 19, a community college kid we'd found hiding inside a drainage culvert outside Cody, Wyoming, 17 days into the outbreak. He hadn't spoken a full sentence for the first 3 days he traveled with us. And the Hargrove sisters, Lena, who was 36 and had been an ER nurse before everything ended, and Kira, who was 28 and had the kind of quiet that made you check if she was still breathing when she slept. We'd been moving south through the Absaroka Range for 11 days. The high altitude bought us time. The infected didn't climb well above 9,000 feet, something about the cold or the thin oxygen, or both. But we were starving. Reese's knee was getting worse, and 3 nights earlier, Danny had spotted the access road. It was paved. That was wrong. Nothing up here should have been paved. Not at that elevation, not that far from any marked trailhead. The asphalt was cracked but maintained within the last decade. It cut east through a corridor of lodgepole pines and ended at a concrete apron set into the mountainside. No signage, no fencing. Just a heavy steel door recessed into the rock face, painted the same gray as the granite around it. You could have hiked past it 100 times and never noticed. But the padlock was cut, and the door was open. "That's military," Lena said from behind me. She was studying the doorframe, the hinges. "Look at the gauge on that steel. That's blast rated." "So why is it open?" Reese asked. She was leaning on Danny's shoulder, keeping weight off her left leg. Her face was pale beneath the sunburn. Nobody answered because nobody had an answer that felt safe. I pushed the door wider. The hinges didn't creak. They were greased. Recently greased. The smell that came out wasn't decay. It was recycled air. Stale but filtered. Somewhere inside, a ventilation system was still running. "Power," Danny said. First word he'd spoken in hours. He was right. Whatever this place was, it still had electricity. In a world where the grid had been dead for 6 weeks, that fact alone changed everything. Power meant heat, meant water purification, meant sealed doors between us and the things outside that had turned the valleys into slaughter corridors. But it also meant someone might already be here. I pulled my headlamp from my pack and clicked it on. The beam caught a descending corridor, poured concrete walls, a floor that sloped downward at maybe 10 degrees. Along the left wall, a conduit of bundled cables ran toward the darkness. The right wall had a painted stripe, yellow about waist height, running the length of the visible corridor like a guideline. "I'll go first," I said. "Danny, stay with Reese. Lena, you're behind me. Kira." "I'm coming," Kira said. It wasn't a request. So the 3 of us went in. And within 40 feet, I saw the first thing that told me this wasn't just an old storage facility. Stenciled on the wall in faded black letters, Site Artemis. Authorized personnel only. USACBRnet. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. Lena stopped walking. I heard her breathing change. "Joel," she whispered, "what did they keep here?" I didn't know, but I was about to find out because 20 feet further, the corridor opened into a room, and in that room, someone had left a message written in what looked like dried blood. The message was on the far wall, smeared across the concrete in rust-brown strokes that had long since dried. Block letters, uneven but deliberate. Someone had taken their time. They didn't get out. They were let out. Kira read it aloud, and her voice didn't waver, which unsettled me more than the words themselves. Lena crossed to the wall and studied the residue. She scraped a flake with her thumbnail, held it under my headlamp. That's blood, she confirmed. Old. Weeks at least. The room was a checkpoint of some kind. A desk bolted to the floor, a wall-mounted phone, receiver dangling, a clipboard with a sign-in log, the last entry dated February 14th, 3 days before the first news reports out of Denver, 5 days before the National Guard deployed in Billings, and a full week before the world admitted what was happening. Someone had been here at the start, maybe before the start. I picked up the clipboard. The last name signed in was CPL Wren, M. The time logged was 0347, 3:47 in the morning. Whatever Corporal Wren had been doing here, it hadn't been routine. Past the checkpoint, the corridor branched, left toward a heavy steel door marked Operations, right towards another marked Containment. Level 3, Clearance. The yellow guide stripe went left. A red stripe, which I hadn't noticed before, went right. We go left, I said. We stick to Operations. We find supplies. We find a layout. We figure out what this place is. And if someone's already here? Kira asked. Then we talk to them. And if they don't want to talk? I didn't answer that. I turned left. The operations wing opened into a series of rooms that made my chest tight with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The first was a communications center. Banks of radio equipment, most of it dark, but 2 indicator lights still glowing amber on a console I didn't recognize. The second room was a supply cache. Shelving units, floor to ceiling, stocked with MREs, water purification tablets, medical kits, batteries, thermal blankets. Enough to sustain a platoon for months. Oh my God, Lena breathed. She was pulling cases down, reading labels. Joel, there are antibiotics here. Real ones. Ciprofloxacin, amoxicillin, doxycycline. Take what we need for Reese's knee, I said. Prioritize the anti-inflammatories in the broad spectrum. There's morphine. That word hung in the air. In the world we'd been living in, a world of torn ligaments treated with willow bark tea and wounds cleaned with creek water, morphine was a miracle. Catalog everything, I told her. Don't move it yet. We don't know what's deeper inside. The third room was a bunk area. 8 cots, military standard. 6 were made, 2 were not. One of the unmade cots had an indentation in the pillow, a wool blanket kicked to the foot. On the floor beside it, an open can of beef stew, a spoon, and a paperback novel face down to hold its page. Someone had been eating. Someone had been reading. Someone had been sleeping here, and they'd left in a hurry, but not in a panic. The book was placed, not dropped. I checked the title, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I almost laughed. Almost. This was recent, Kira said. She was kneeling beside the cot, touching the blanket. Feel this. There's still warmth trapped in the fibers. Not body heat, but this room is climate controlled. This bed was slept in within the last few days. 3 days, I thought. Maybe 2. Whoever had been here, they might still be inside the facility, or they'd left through the same door we'd entered. Either way, they were ahead of us in understanding what this place was. I went back to the corridor, stood at the branch point, looked right toward the containment wing. The red stripe disappeared into darkness. That door was closed but not locked. The latch handle was depressed, the bolt retracted. Someone had opened it and hadn't sealed it behind them. Every instinct I'd developed in 47 days of survival told me to ignore that door. Take the supplies, barricade the entrance, stay in operations. But the message on the wall wouldn't leave me alone. I brought Danny and Reese inside before we went any further. Danny half-carried Reese down the corridor, her arm over his shoulder, her jaw clenched with every step. When she saw the supply room, something broke behind her eyes. Not sadness, but the release of tension she'd been holding so long it had calcified. She sat on a crate of MREs and pressed her palms against her face, and her shoulders shook once before she regained control. Lena was already working on Reese's knee. She'd found a proper splint kit in the medical supplies, along with compression wraps and an instant cold pack that still activated when she cracked it. Reese hissed at the cold but didn't pull away. This is infected, Lena murmured, examining the swollen tissue around the joint. Not the zombie kind of infected, the ordinary bacterial kind that could kill you just as dead without antibiotics. Another 3 days and we'd be talking about amputation scenarios. Don't talk about that, Reese said. I'm talking about it because we found this place in time. You're going to be fine. Lena loaded a syringe. Keflex first, then we get some clean fluids in you. When's the last time you drank water that wasn't brown? While Lena worked, I spread a facility map I'd found into the communications room across the desk. Site Artemis was larger than the surface suggested. The operations wing where we stood was just the top floor. Below it, accessible by a freight elevator and a stairwell, were 2 additional levels. Level 2 was labeled Research and Analysis. Level 3 was labeled Biological Containment Restricted. The map had been annotated. Someone, maybe Corporal Wren, maybe someone else, had drawn circles in red pen around 3 locations. The containment lab on level 3, a cold storage unit also on level 3, and something on level 2 labeled simply Observation Room 2C. Next to the observation room, the annotator had written a single word: Watch. We're not going down there tonight, Danny said. He was reading the map over my shoulder. His voice had that flat quality it took on when he was frightened but didn't want to show it. Nobody's going anywhere tonight, Amamwa, I agreed. We seal the entrance, we eat, we sleep in shifts. Tomorrow, Lena and I go to level 2. I want to know what's in that observation room. Why? Kira asked. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms folded. We have supplies. We have walls. We have power. Why do we need to go deeper? Because somebody wrote a message in blood on the wall. Because somebody was living here and then left. Because there's a biological containment level underneath our feet and a door that somebody opened and didn't close. Pick a reason. Kira held my gaze for 3 full seconds. I pick all of them. That's why we shouldn't go. She wasn't wrong, but I'd spent 12 years as a ranger, and in those years I'd learned one rule that never failed. If you don't understand the ground you're standing on, the ground will move beneath you. We couldn't fortify a position we didn't comprehend. We sealed the main entrance with a crossbar we fabricated from shelving supports. Danny proved surprisingly useful here. He'd worked summers in his uncle's welding shop and understood leverage points. The door held solid. Nothing was getting through without serious hardware or explosives. We ate real food for the first time in weeks. The MRAs were from a 2019 lot: beef ravioli, chicken with noodles, maple sausage patties. The sodium content alone was enough to make you weep. Danny ate 2 full meals and then looked embarrassed, and Lena told him to eat a third because his body was consuming its own muscle mass and needed the protein. Reese fell asleep on one of the cots within 20 minutes of eating, the antibiotics and morphine pulling her under. The color was already better in her face. Lena sat beside her, monitoring her pulse, and for the first time since I'd met her, day 9 outside a ransacked pharmacy in Powell, Lena looked like she could breathe. I took the first watch, sat in the corridor at the branch point, headlamp off, listening. At 0200, I heard something from behind the containment door. A tapping, rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Someone was signaling. I didn't wake the others. That was my first mistake, and I've replayed it enough times to know it. I sat in that corridor and listened to the knocking for 11 minutes by my watch. 333, pause, 333, pause, patient, measured. Not the pounding of an infected. They didn't knock, they threw themselves at barriers with the mindless momentum of falling trees. This was communication. This was a person. Or it was something that remembered being a person. That thought had been with me since Casper, since we'd watched an infected woman try to use a doorknob. Her hand kept slipping, fingers spasming, but the muscle memory was there. The intent was there. She'd used that door 1,000 times before she turned, and some residual circuit was still firing. The knocking stopped at 0213. I waited another hour. Nothing. At dawn, or what my watch told me was dawn, since we were sealed underground, I told the group what I'd heard. Danny's face went tight. Reese, still groggy from the morphine, sat up on the cot, and immediately reached for her revolver. Lena said nothing, just checked the zipper on the medical bag she'd packed. Kira said, "If there's a survivor down there, we have to check." "Yesterday you wanted to stay put," I reminded her. "Yesterday I didn't know someone might be trapped below us." She was right, and the shift in her reasoning told me something about Kira I should have recognized earlier. She wasn't cautious by nature. She was cautious about herself, about her own survival. The moment someone else might need help, the calculus changed entirely. We made a plan. Danny would stay with Reese in the operations wing. If we weren't back in 2 hours, he'd take Reese and whatever supplies they could carry and leave through the main entrance. No heroics, no search parties. Just go. Danny accepted this with a nod that looked too much like relief. Lena, Kira, and I took the stairwell down to level 2. The freight elevator was operational. The lights on its panel glowed when I pressed the call button. But trusting in a 40-year-old elevator in a facility with unknown power stability felt like the kind of decision you only make once. The stairs were concrete, switch-backed, and lit by emergency strips along the treads that emitted a faint blue-green phosphorescence. Level 2 was different. Operations had felt functional. Desks, bunks, radio equipment. Level 2 felt like a place where questions were asked that nobody wanted answered. The corridor was wider, the ceiling higher, and every door had a keycard reader beside it. Most were dark, unpowered, but 3 showed green indicator lights. The first unlocked door opened into a lab. Benches lined with equipment I couldn't identify. Centrifuges, incubators, things with digital readouts that were still cycling through numbers. On one bench, a laptop sat open. Its screen was dark, but when I touched the trackpad, it woke. The desktop background was a government seal I didn't recognize. Not DoD, not CDC, a stylized helix encircled by a laurel wreath with the text, Joint Program Executive Office. Biological Threat Reduction. Kira leaned past me and opened the most recent file in the Documents folder. It was a log, entries dated from January through mid-February. I read the last 3. February 12th, Subject 7 showing accelerated neurological decay, motor function deteriorating faster than previous cohort. Vocalization persists. Dr. On believes the auditory cortex retains function longer than motor centers. They can hear us, they just can't stop. February 13th, containment protocols reviewed with Colonel Harstead. Decision to proceed with Phase 3 aerosolization test. I have formally lodged my objection. It's on record. That's all I can do. Feb 14th, God forgive us. February 14th, the same date as the last entry on the checkpoint log, 3 days before Denver. Lena had gone still beside me. I could see her processing it, the ER nurse trained to absorb bad news quickly and act. But this wasn't a patient coding in Bay 4. This was the architecture of everything that had killed the world. They made it here, she said. Not a question. They made it here, I confirmed, and then they let it out. Kira took the laptop. She closed it, unplugged it from the wall charger, and tucked it under her arm without asking permission. I didn't object. Whatever was on that hard drive might be the most important object left on the continent, and Kira understood that before I did. We moved to the second green-lit door. The keycard reader flashed when Lena waved her hand near it, and the door clicked open. It had been set to unlock for any proximity input. Behind it was the observation room. Room 2C, the one circled on the map, the one marked Watch. It was small, maybe 12 feet by 12. One wall was dominated by a window, reinforced glass, at least 2 inches thick, looking down into a chamber on the level below. The containment level. From this vantage point, we could see into a wide, fluorescent-lit space divided into individual cells by thick, transparent partitions. There were 8 cells. 6 were empty. The glass walls were smeared and cracked in places, but intact. The floors had drains. The lighting was stark, surgical. Cell 4 held a body, a woman curled on her side, not moving. She wore a hospital gown. Her skin had the gray-blue modeling I'd learned to recognize, the capillary death that preceded full turning. But she wasn't moving. She might have been dead, truly dead. Cell 7 held something alive. He was a man, or had been. He stood in the center of his cell, perfectly still, facing our observation window. His head was tilted at an angle that suggested he was listening. His eyes were open, but from this distance, I couldn't tell if they tracked. He was thin, emaciated really, and his gown hung off shoulders that had once been broad. His hands hung at his sides, fingers twitching in microspasms. And then he raised his right hand and knocked on the glass partition of his cell. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. That's your sound, Kira said. The vibration carried through the structure of the building, through concrete and steel and 30 vertical feet of engineered separation. He'd been knocking all night, and the sound had traveled up through the bones of Site Artemis like a pulse through a body. He's signaling, Lena said. She'd moved to the window and was studying him with clinical focus. That's not random motor activity. That's pattern. That's intentional. The log said they retain auditory processing, I reminded her. Maybe they retain more than that. Joel, if that's true, she stopped herself. I watched her recalibrate. If the higher brain functions are partially preserved, that changes everything about what's been happening outside. Every person we've seen turn, every person we've... Don't, I said. Not yet. We can't go there yet. She was right, though. If the infected retained consciousness, if they could hear, could think, could signal, then the 47 days of horror we'd survived weren't just a catastrophe. They were something worse. Every infected person we'd fought, fled from, watched tear through settlements, might have been trapped inside their own body, screaming without a voice. I looked at the man in cell 7. He'd stopped knocking. His head had tilted further, almost to his shoulder, and I realized he wasn't just listening. He was looking at us. Through the observation glass, through 2 floors of facility, he knew we were there. Kira pulled me back from the window. We need to go through the containment level to understand this. The log mentioned a phase 3 test. Aerosolization. If that's how it got out, if there's a pathogen still active down there, the ventilation system has been running for 7 weeks. If it was airborne in here, we'd already be exposed. She said it so calmly that I almost missed the weight of it. She was right. We'd been breathing this facility's air since we walked in. If the aerosolized agent was still circulating, the question wasn't whether we'd turn. It was when. I looked at Lena. She'd gone pale beneath her tan. We need to find whoever was sleeping in that bunk upstairs, I said, because they breathed this air too, and they were still human enough to read a novel. We went back up. I needed to think before we descended to containment, and I needed to share what we'd found with Danny and Reese. They deserved to know what was beneath them. They deserved to decide whether to stay. Danny took the news about the aerosolized pathogen with a stillness that concerned me. He sat on the edge of a cot, hands between his knees, staring at the floor. Reese was more vocal. So we might already be infected, she said. We don't know that. The ventilation system has HEPA filtration. I saw the units in the corridor. Military-grade air handling. It's possible the pathogen was scrubbed from circulation weeks ago. Possible? Yes, possible. But not certain. Nothing's been certain since February, Reese. She looked at me with the expression I'd first seen the day the radio stations went silent. A combination of fury and exhaustion that lived in the space between fighting and giving up. Then she reached for the clipboard I'd brought from the checkpoint. Corporal Wren, she read, USACBRN. That's the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear Command. This person was stationed here. Or was assigned here when things started going wrong. They signed in at 3:47 a.m. on February 14th. The day before the log says everything fell apart. What if Wren was sent to contain it? And failed, Danny said quietly. Or succeeded in containing it here, Reese countered. And it got out somewhere else, too. The log talks about aerosolization tests, plural implication. What if this wasn't the only site? The thought opened a chasm beneath my feet. I'd spent 47 days assuming the outbreak was a natural event, a mutation, a spillover. The kind of pandemic scenario that epidemiologists had warned about for decades. The idea that it was engineered was horrible, but not surprising. The idea that it was deliberately released as a test was something else entirely. Kira had the laptop open on the desk and was scrolling through files with the focus of someone trained in research. I learned later she'd been a graduate student in microbiology, Montana State, before the outbreak, a detail she'd never shared in the weeks we traveled together. She hadn't hidden it. Nobody had asked. "There are personnel files here," she said. "Partial, most are encrypted, but the directory structure shows 16 staff assigned to Site Artemis. 12 researchers, 2 security, 1 medical officer, 1 facility engineer. The last backup to this laptop was February 14th at 02:15. An hour and a half before Wren signed in at the checkpoint," Reese noted. "Someone backed up the data and then a soldier arrived. That feels like a handoff." "Or an evacuation," Lena said. "If they evacuated, why was someone still sleeping here days later?" Nobody answered. The timeline was fractured, and we didn't have enough pieces to reconstruct it. What we had was a facility that had developed a biological weapon, or studied one, in a sequence of events that culminated in the worst catastrophe in human history. And we were inside the machine that built it. I made a decision. Lena and I go to containment. Level 3. We need to see the cold storage, and we need to understand what Phase 3 was. Kira, keep working through those files. Danny, Reese, you're on entrance watch. If anything comes through that door, you barricade the corridor and you yell. "What about the man in cell 7? Lena asked. "What about him?" "He's alive, Joel. Whatever version of alive that is, he's responsive, he's signaling. If this facility created the infection, there might be treatment data down there. Research notes, something we can use." "Use for what?" "To help people." The simplicity of it stung. I'd been thinking about survival, about walls, food, ammunition. Lena was thinking about reversal, about the possibility that somewhere in the data we were sitting on, there was a key to undoing what had been done. "We look," I said. "That's all I'm promising." Lena nodded. She sealed the medical bag, checked the pen light she'd clipped to her collar, and stood. "Let's go see what they did," she said. I followed her to the stairwell, and we went down into the dark. The stairwell to level 3 had a smell. Not decay, something chemical, antiseptic, like the ghost of industrial cleaner layered over a faint organic sweetness that made my stomach clench. The emergency strip lighting was dimmer here, some sections dead entirely. So we moved through alternating pools of blue-green glow and absolute darkness. Lena kept one hand on the wall. I kept one hand on the folding knife I'd carried since Cody. The door at the bottom was different from the others. Heavier, a pressure seal with a manual wheel lock, the kind you'd see on a submarine hatch. It was cracked open. The wheel turned to the unlocked position, the door resting against the frame without engaging the seal. Someone had left it this way. The same someone who'd left the main entrance ajar, who'd opened the containment wing door on level 1. A path had been cleared for us, or for someone. I pulled the door open. The air that came through was colder, drier. The climate control down here was separate from the upper levels. I could hear the different frequency of the HVAC units, a lower hum, more insistent. The corridor beyond was wider than those above, and the walls were lined with a material I didn't recognize. Smooth, slightly glossy, not concrete, some kind of epoxy coating, maybe designed for decontamination. You could hose these walls down and everything would run to the floor drains that appeared every 10 feet. The lighting was fluorescent, and about half the tubes were still burning. The ones that had died created gaps of shadow that my headlamp couldn't fully penetrate. We moved slowly. The first room we passed was labeled Decontamination Shower. Entry protocol required. The door was propped open with a yellow plastic wedge. Inside, a row of shower stalls with chemical dispensers mounted overhead. A bench with cubbies that still held folded hazmat suits. One suit was on the floor, crumpled, as if someone had stepped out of it in a hurry. "We should be wearing those," Lena said. "If the air was going to turn us, it would have happened already." That's not how all pathogens work. Some require direct contact, droplet exposure. The suits aren't just for airborne threats. She was right, but the suits were designed for people with training in biohazard protocols, and putting one on incorrectly was arguably worse than not wearing one. A false sense of security that could lead to fatal mistakes. I told her this and she accepted it with a tight nod. We passed 2 more rooms, a sample processing lab with an autoclave and a biosafety cabinet, both powered down. A records room with filing cabinets, most drawers open and empty. Someone had cleared the paper files. They'd taken the hard copies and left the digital ones on the laptop upstairs. That felt deliberate, a selective disclosure. Then the corridor opened into the containment chamber we'd seen from above. The observation room's window was visible high on the opposite wall, a dark rectangle. From down here, the cells looked different, larger, more clinical. The transparent partitions were polycarbonate. I could see the manufacturer's stamp embossed in one corner. Each cell had a cot, a sink, a toilet, a camera mounted in the upper corner. Cell 4's occupant, the woman in the hospital gown, was still motionless. From this distance, maybe 20 feet, I could see her chest wasn't moving. Her eyes were open, filmed over, staring at nothing. She'd been dead for a while, the real kind. Cell 7 was directly ahead of us. The man was still standing, still facing the observation window above, even though we were now on his level. He hadn't adjusted, hadn't tracked our entrance. But as we stood there, his head began to rotate, slowly, degrees at a time, like a satellite dish seeking signal. It turned past 90 degrees, past the range of normal cervical rotation, the tendons in his neck standing out like bridge cables. His eyes found us. They were brown, human brown. Not the clouded hemorrhagic red I'd seen in every infected person outside these walls. These eyes had clarity, focus, intelligence. And they were full of something I'd never expected to see in the face of the infected. Grief. He moved to the front of his cell. Not the lurching, momentum-driven charge of the infected. A walk. Shuffling, impaired, his left leg dragging slightly but controlled. He reached the polycarbonate partition and raised his hand again. Placed his palm flat against it. Fingers spread. A gesture so human it made my throat close. Then he opened his mouth, and what came out was not a moan or a shriek. It was a sound caught between those things in speech. A guttural, strained pushing of air through vocal cords that had partially atrophied, like a stroke patient fighting to form words months after the event. P. Lena grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. Did he just? Yes. Joel, he's asking for help. I heard it. The man's jaw worked. The effort was visible. Every muscle in his face straining, his brow furrowed with concentration. A line of saliva descended from his lower lip. His eyes never left us. Not gone. Not gone. He was telling us he was still in there. The person, whoever he'd been before, researcher, soldier, test subject, was still present behind the infection, locked inside a body that was failing him, that had been weaponized against his own consciousness. I looked at his wristband. White plastic, hospital issue, black text. From this distance, I could make out a name. Emery. T. Emery, I said. Not loudly, just at a normal conversational volume. His eyes widened, his hand pressed harder against the partition. Yeah, yes. My name is Joel. This is Lena. Can you understand me? A nod, slow, effortful, but unmistakable. How long have you been in this cell? His mouth opened and closed several times. The frustration was searing to watch. A mind trying to operate machinery that had been sabotaged. Finally, he raised both hands, fingers extended. Then again, then held up 3 fingers. 23 days? Lena guessed. A nod. 23 days. That put his containment at roughly February 14th, the same day everything else in this facility's timeline collapsed. He'd been locked in this cell since the beginning. Were you a researcher here? I asked. He shook his head, raised one hand, mimed writing. You wrote something? He pointed upward, toward level 1, the blood message, the wall. They didn't get out. They were let out. You wrote that, I said. A nod, and then his face contorted in something that was neither a snarl nor a cry, but somehow both. A spasm of emotion that his damaged neurology could barely express. His hands came up to his face, and I understood with absolute clarity that Thomas Emery was weeping. Without tears, his body couldn't produce them anymore. But the mechanism of grief was intact. Lena stepped closer to the partition. I put a hand out to stop her, but she brushed past it. Thomas, I'm a nurse. I want to help you. Can you tell me, were you infected deliberately? His hands came down. He looked at Lena, nodded once. By the staff here? A nod. Phase 3, I said. The aerosolization test. His reaction was immediate. He slammed his palm against the polycarbonate, not in anger toward us, but in confirmation, in the desperate affirmation of someone who has been screaming into silence and finally been heard. His mouth worked again. They knew it wouldn't stay. They knew it wouldn't stay contained. The staff of Site Artemis had known the aerosolization test would breach containment, and they'd done it anyway. Whether by arrogance, by orders, or by ideology, they'd released a pathogen they couldn't control, and then, what? Fled? Died? The other cells, Lena said, glancing at the empty ones. Where are the other subjects? Emery's face changed. The grief was still there, but something harder surfaced beneath it. His hand rose and he pointed, not at the cells, not at the door. He pointed at the corridor behind us, the one that continued deeper into level 3, toward the cold storage unit marked on the map. Then he shook his head, slowly, back and forth, a warning. Don't, he managed, the clearest word he'd spoken. Don't go. Should have listened. That's the sentence I'll carry until whatever end is waiting for me. Thomas Emery, trapped in a body that was eating him alive, burning every scrap of remaining cognition to form 2 words of warning. And I walked past them like they were suggestions. My reasoning was this. The cold storage unit was where the pathogen samples were kept. If there was any possibility of synthesizing a treatment, of understanding the infection's mechanism well enough to fight it, the answers were in that room. Lena agreed. She had the clinical objectivity to see past the horror of Emery's condition to the medical opportunity it represented. If he was partially preserved, if the infection hadn't fully consumed his higher functions, then something about his biology was resistant, and understanding resistance was the first step toward a cure. We left Emery at the partition. He watched us go with those devastatingly clear eyes, and the last thing I saw before we turned the corner was his hand dropping from the polycarbonate, fingers curling inward, the posture of someone who has given all the help they can. The corridor past the containment chamber narrowed. The fluorescent lighting ended entirely, replaced by red emergency lamps that gave everything the quality of a darkroom photograph. The floor drains were more frequent here, and several were clogged. Dark residue had accumulated around the grates, viscous, biological. The cold storage unit was behind a door thicker than any we'd encountered, a true vault door with a combination wheel and a biometric scanner. The scanner was dark, unpowered, or disabled. The combination wheel was in the open position. Again, someone had preceded us. Someone had opened every sealed door in this facility and left them accessible. I turned the handle and pulled. The cold hit first, not the dry, controlled cold of the upper levels, but a genuine chill, maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath condensed. Lena's headlamp beam joined mine, and together they illuminated a room about 30 feet deep, lined on both sides with industrial shelving and stainless steel racks. On the racks, sample containers, hundreds of them, small, cylindrical, labeled with alphanumeric codes. Row after row of pathogen samples, preserved and cataloged with meticulous care. This was the library, the entire history of whatever they'd been developing at Site Artemis, stored in a room that someone had deliberately unlocked. But that wasn't what stopped me. At the back of the room, a desk had been set up. Not part of the original design, it was a folding table, the kind you'd find in a church basement, with a metal chair behind it. On the desk, a stack of paper, handwritten. a pen, a framed photograph face down, and a body. The man was slumped in the chair, head resting on his arms, as if he'd fallen asleep at his work. He wore military fatigues, Army digital camouflage. His sidearm was still holstered. On his collar, the rank insignia of a corporal. The name tape on his chest read, Wren. I didn't need to check for a pulse. The color of his skin, the stillness, the faint sweet odor beneath the chemical cold. He'd been dead for days, maybe longer in the preserved air. No visible wounds, no signs of infection, no mottling, no hemorrhaging. He looked like he'd simply stopped. Lena moved past me. She picked up the handwritten pages. Her eyes scanned the first one, and I watched her expression move through confusion, then recognition, then something colder. "It's a confession," she said. "He wrote a confession." She handed me the first page. The handwriting was small, precise, military in its economy. "My name is Marcus Wren. I was assigned to Site Artemis on February 14th with orders to sterilize the facility and destroy all biological materials. I was told the breach was accidental. This was a lie. I have accessed the project files and understand now that the release was authorized at the program level. Phase 3 was never a test, it was deployment. I have chosen not to destroy the samples. I have chosen to leave them and this record for whoever comes next. The combination to the main vault is in my breast pocket. I have also left all doors unsealed. If you are reading this, you are standing inside the origin point. I'm sorry. I tried to do the right thing, and I no longer know what that is. I read Wren's confession 3 times in that freezing room, each pass revealing something the previous one had missed. Not in the words themselves, those were brutally clear, but in what they implied about the shape of the catastrophe we'd been living through. He'd been sent to destroy evidence, to sterilize. The military knew what Site Artemis was, knew what had been released, and their first response wasn't containment or cure. It was erasure. Wipe the facility, burn the samples, make it look like the outbreak was a natural event. Plausible deniability at the cost of any chance to develop a countermeasure. And Wren had refused. He'd opened every door instead, cut the padlock, left the laptop powered, arranged the files so that anyone who entered would find a trail to follow. He'd made Site Artemis into a monument to what had been done, and then he'd sat down at a desk in a cold room and died. Whether by his own hand or by something slower and sadder, the confession didn't say. Lena was examining his body with professional detachment, though I could see the strain it cost her. She checked his pupils, his fingernails, the color of his gums. "No signs of infection," she reported. "No external trauma. I'd need a full examination to be sure, but..." She paused. "There's a bottle in his left cargo pocket. Prescription, secobarbital. Barbiturates." He'd made his choice, written his note, and gone to sleep in the room that held the evidence he'd saved. I took the photograph from the desk and turned it over. A woman and 2 children, a boy maybe 8, a girl maybe 5, standing in front of a house with a red door. Ordinary, beautiful, gone. "We need to bring this to the others," Lena said, meaning the confession, the laptop files, the whole terrible architecture of truth we'd uncovered. "If there are other survivor groups out there, if there's any functioning government, this changes the conversation." "There's no functioning government, Lena. You don't know that. I know that Wren was the government's response and his mission was to make this disappear." She took the pages from me, folded them carefully, and placed them inside the medical bag. Then she began photographing the sample racks with a digital camera she'd found in the communications room upstairs. Methodical, complete, every label, every row, every code. I was watching her work when the intercom crackled. Every room in the facility had a wall-mounted speaker, part of an internal PA system. They'd been silent since we arrived. Now a burst of static, followed by Danny's voice, thin and panicked. Joel, if you can hear me, something's wrong with the entrance. We're hearing sounds outside, not knocking, scraping, lots of it." Reese says she can hear." His voice cut out, replaced by static, then returned. "At least a dozen, maybe more. They found us." My blood cooled. 47 days of running, and every time you stopped, Every time you thought you'd found safety, they found you. Not because they were smart, but because they were relentless, tireless, driven by whatever corrupted signal the pathogens sent through their ruined nervous systems. How long? I shouted at the speaker, though I didn't know if the system was two-way. It was. Danny's voice came back. I don't know. The door is holding, but they're not stopping, and the sound is getting louder. Some of them are at the ventilation grates. The ventilation grates. The HVAC system drew external air through intake vents on the mountain surface. Those vents had covers, mesh screens, maybe grated steel, designed to keep out animals and debris. Not designed to keep out things that used to be human, things that could grip and pull and tear with the manic strength the infection bestowed. Seal the operations wing, I ordered. Close every door between you and the entrance. Use the shelving to brace them. We're coming up. Lena was already moving. She grabbed the medical bag, the camera, and one sample container from the rack. I didn't see which one. We ran. Behind us, in cell 7, I heard Thomas Emery begin to scream. Not in rage, in recognition. He knew what was coming before we did. We hit the stairwell at a dead sprint. Lena was faster than me, which I hadn't expected. Her legs were longer, and she moved with the efficient economy of someone who'd spent years navigating hospital corridors at urgent speed. I was 3 steps behind her, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly off the walls as we climbed. Level 2, no change. The labs were dark and silent. Level 1, I could hear it before we cleared the stairwell door. A sound like hail on a tin roof, but irregular, organic. The sound of hands and skulls and shoulders impacting the main entrance door from outside. Not a few, not a dozen. It was the sound of a crowd, and it had a rhythm to it that was almost musical in its horror. Waves of impact followed by brief lulls, followed by renewed assault. Danny had done well. The operations wing corridor was blocked by a barricade of shelving units, cots, and supply crates, wedged together with a competence that spoke to his instinct for structural integrity. He and Reese were behind it, Reese on her feet despite the knee, the .38 in her hand, aimed at the main corridor. How long has this been going on? I asked. 20 minutes maybe. It started as scratching, like something testing the door. Then more arrived. Kira was at the communications console. She'd put down the laptop and was working the radio equipment, scanning frequencies, adjusting dials. I was about to ask what she was doing when she held up a hand. Listen, she said. From the radio speaker, through a wash of static, a voice, faint, male, repeating. Any personnel at federal continuity sites, this is a priority broadcast from Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center. We are requesting status from all Artemis, Phalanx, and Sentinel installations. Respond on this frequency. Authentication code Broken Arrow. I repeat. The message looped. A government broadcast. Someone was alive in the command structure, or had been when the recording was made. Mount Weather was a FEMA continuity of government facility in Virginia. I knew about it the way most rangers knew about federal infrastructure, vaguely from briefings that felt theoretical. How old is that signal? I asked Kira. I can't tell. It's on a loop. Could be weeks old, could be current, but the frequency is active. Someone's maintaining the broadcast or the automated system is still running. They're looking for sites like this one, Reese said from behind the barricade. Federal continuity sites. Artemis is one of them. Which means if we respond, someone might come. Or someone might come to finish what Ren refused to do. The pounding on the entrance grew louder. A new sound joined it, a metallic groaning from somewhere above us. The ventilation system. They're in the vents, Danny said. His voice had gone flat again, the fear mode monotone I'd learned to recognize. I heard something in the ceiling 10 minutes ago, crawling. The HVAC ducts in a facility this size would be large enough for a person to navigate. They were designed for airflow, not security. The grates inside the rooms were held by screws, standard Phillips heads, easily defeated by persistent force. New plan, I said. We can't stay on this level. The entrance might hold, but the ventilation system is compromised. We go down. Level 2 has no external access. No vents connect to the outside. The air is recycled internally. It's sealed from the surface. We're going deeper, Danny said. We're going where they can't reach us. With the things in the cells. Emery is contained. The woman in cell 4 is dead. The other cells are empty. How do you know something else isn't down there? I didn't. But I knew what was up here. An army of infected pressing against our front door and infiltrating our air supply. The math was simple, even if the answer was terrifying. Grab the essentials, I said. MRS, water, medical supplies, ammunition. Kira, take the laptop and the radio if you can disconnect it. We move in 5 minutes. Nobody argued. That's how you knew it was bad, when the group stopped questioning and started packing. Debate was a luxury of safety. We had 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The first ceiling grate buckled at 4 minutes flat. The grate came down in the communications room. I heard the screws shear, a quick pop, 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 and then the aluminum frame crashed onto the console where Kira had been sitting 30 seconds earlier. She'd already moved, the radio unit in her arms, the laptop in her pack. Through the opening, a shape dropped. It hit the floor in a crouch that would have been graceful if it weren't driven by a parasitic imperative that had consumed the person it used to be. Female, young, wearing the shredded remnants of hiking clothes, this had been a backpacker, someone who'd been in the mountains when the world ended. Her face was a topography of burst capillaries and swollen tissue, her eyes the hemorrhagic crimson I'd seen too many times. She oriented on movement, on Kira. Go, I said. Not a shout, a command. Everyone moved. Danny pulled Reese through the corridor. Kira went next, then Lena. I was last, and I pulled the shelving barricade down behind me as I retreated, sending it crashing across the corridor to buy seconds. The infected woman hit the obstruction and began climbing it without hesitation. No problem solving, just upward motion, fluid and relentless. We reached the stairwell. I hauled the door shut and turned the manual lock. It wasn't the pressure seal of the lower levels, but it was steel, and the lock was rated for institutional security. It would hold longer than a barricade. Move, I said, and we descended. Level 2. I stopped long enough to seal the stairwell door here as well. Another manual lock. 2 barriers between us and the surface. Then down again to level 3, through the submarine hatch, which I sealed with the wheel lock for the first time since Wren had left it open. 3 sealed doors, multiple flights of stairs, and the width of 2 stories of reinforced concrete. We were as far from the surface as the facility allowed. We were also trapped. The containment floor's emergency lighting painted everything in that red photograph glow. Our headlamps added white beams that seemed aggressive by comparison. Danny eased Reese onto the floor of the decontamination room, the first space past the hatch, and she sat with her back against the wall, the revolver across her lap, breathing hard. Status, I said. Knees holding, Reese replied. Lena's work is good. I can move if I have to. Danny? I'm here. His voice was small but steady. Kira? Radio's intact, laptop's intact. I'm intact. She set the equipment down and began reconnecting cables with hands that trembled only slightly. Lena was already in motion. She moved past us toward the containment chamber, toward Emery. I followed her. He was where we'd left him, standing at the partition, hand pressed flat against the polycarbonate. But his posture had changed. He was leaning forward, his forehead touching the surface, and the microspasms in his fingers had intensified. He looked worse than he had 2 hours ago. The decay was progressing. Thomas, Lena said. She knelt so she was at his eye level. We found Wren. We read his confession. We know what happened here. Emery's eyes tracked to her. The clarity I'd seen earlier was dimming, not gone but flickering, like a signal losing strength. How long? He asked. How long do you have? A nod. I don't know. I'd need to examine you properly. Is there a way to open this cell safely? His hand moved on the polycarbonate. He drew a shape, not a letter, a gesture. He was pointing to the right side of the partition, where a small keypad was mounted, flush with the frame. Override code, he managed. 4771. Lena looked at me. The question was in her face without being spoken. Do we open the cell of an infected man, even one who could speak, even one who was weeping? The pounding from above, from the entrance, from the vents, from the weight of the dead pressing against our shelter, echoed down through the structure of Site Artemis like a failing heartbeat. I had to decide what we were, survivors who hid or people who still tried. Open it, I said. Lena entered the code. The partition slid sideways on a track, smooth and mechanical, opening a gap of about 3 feet. Emery didn't rush through it. He stood where he was, swaying slightly, and then he took one careful step forward, then another. Each movement was a negotiation between his will and his body, and watching it was like watching someone walk on a broken leg, the determination more painful than the injury. He cleared the threshold and stopped, looked at us, raised his hands, palms outward, a gesture of surrender, of harmlessness, of please don't be afraid. Lena approached him the way she would have approached a trauma patient, calm, measured, narrating her actions. I'm going to check your pulse, Thomas. Is that okay? He nodded. She took his wrist. I watched her count, her lips moving silently, her brow furrowed. Heart rate is abnormally slow, maybe 35 BPM. Thomas, do you experience episodes where you lose awareness? Where the other impulses take over? His face contorted. The honesty cost him something. Yes, worse. At night, worse when hungry. When did you last eat? He looked at the floor. The shame was unmistakable. The woman, I said. In cell 4. Emery closed his eyes and his entire body shuddered. When his eyes opened, the grief from earlier was back, magnified, a depth of self-horror that no fully infected person could possibly experience. So couldn't. Stop it. She was already dying. The infection, it takes what it needs. Lena's expression didn't change. She processed this information the way she processed everything, as data, as symptom, as the raw material of treatment. But I saw her hand tighten on his wrist before she released it. The sample's in cold storage, she said. The pathogen variants. Is there one that's different? One that might explain why you've retained cognition? Emery raised a hand. The effort of sustained speech was clearly draining him. Each word cost calories and neural bandwidth he couldn't afford. He pointed toward the corridor that led deeper into level 3, past cold storage, past the vault where Ren lay. There's a room, past storage, lab 4. They were working on a modifier, not a cure, a bridge. Slows the decay, preserves the cortex. I was the trial. A bridge. Not a cure, but a way to slow the infection's consumption of higher brain function. If it worked, if it could be refined, produced, distributed, it wouldn't save the infected, but it might preserve the people inside them. Give them time. Give researchers time. Is it synthesized? Is there a usable supply? Some. In the refrigerator. Lab 4, blue vials. Lena looked at me. I need to get those. Go, I'll stay with him. She went, fast, purposeful, the headlamp beam disappearing around the corner. I stood in the containment chamber with Thomas Emery, a man who was simultaneously a patient, a victim, and a potential threat. And I waited. You have people, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen us through the observation window, heard our voices through the structure. 5 of us, including me. Get them out. We're sealed in. The surface is overrun. Not the surface. He raised his hand again and pointed at the floor. Below. There's nothing below level 3. There is. Emergency egress. Tunnel. Comes out. 2 miles south, above the tree line. Built for evacuation. An escape tunnel. In a military bunker designed for continuity of government scenarios. Of course, there would be a secondary exit. Ren's confession hadn't mentioned it. The facility map hadn't shown it. But Emery had been here for over 7 weeks, conscious and aware, trapped in a cell with nothing to do but study his environment. Show me, I said. He turned slowly and began walking. I fell into step beside him, through the corridor, past cold storage, past Lab 4 where I could hear Lena opening a refrigerator, to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. The same glossy epoxy coating, the same featureless surface. Emery pressed his palm flat against the wall. A panel depressed and clicked. A seam appeared. A door, perfectly flush, swung inward. Behind it, a tunnel, concrete-lined, stretching into darkness, and cold mountain air. Fresh air. A way out. I gathered everyone. It took 12 minutes to move the group from the decontamination room to the tunnel entrance. 12 minutes during which the sounds from above intensified, the pounding reverberating through the structure with increasing urgency, as if the infected above could sense the facility's inhabitants retreating from their reach. Reese saw Emery and raised the .38. I stepped between them. He's with us. He's infected, Joel. He's also the reason we're about to survive the next hour. Put it down. She didn't put it down, but she lowered it. Danny stared at Emery with wide eyes. Not horror exactly, but the profound disorientation of watching a category dissolve. Infected meant enemy. Infected meant mindless. Emery was neither. Kira emerged from Lab 4 with Lena. Lena carried a small insulated case, the blue vials, the bridge compound. Kira carried the laptop, the radio, and Ren's confession. Between the five of us, we had the food, the medicine, the evidence, and the science. Everything Site Artemis had to offer, packed into bags and cases and pockets. The tunnel runs 2 miles south-southwest, I told the group. It exits above the tree line. From there, we move south through the high country. We stay above 9,000 feet. We find a defensible position and we use the radio to contact Mount Weather. And tell them what? Reese asked. She was still watching Emery, who stood apart from the group, cognizant of the fear he inspired, trying to make himself small. Everything. Ren's confession. The project files, the bridge compound. We tell them what happened here and we make them answer for it. They'll deny it. Maybe, but we'll have the proof. And if there are other survivor groups out there with radios, we broadcast wide. We make it impossible to deny. The tunnel was narrow, single file with emergency lighting strips along the floor that still function, powered by what must have been an independent generator or a battery backup of extraordinary capacity. The air grew colder as we walked, the mountain's ambient temperature seeping through the concrete. Reese leaned on Danny. Lena walked beside Emery, monitoring him, asking quiet questions about his symptoms. Kira was ahead of me, her headlamp steady, her pace measured. We walked for 40 minutes. The tunnel was straight, angled slightly upward, and the grade was gentle enough that Reese could manage. At the 30-minute mark, I felt the air change, a shift in pressure, a freshness that made my lungs expand fully for the first time in hours. At the 40-minute mark, we reached a door. Similar to the main entrance, steel, blast-rated, but smaller. A single padlock intact this time. Ren hadn't come this far. This door had been sealed since the facility was built. I used the bolt cutters from the supply cache. The lock gave way with a sharp crack that echoed back down the tunnel behind us. I pushed the door open. Mountain air. Thin, cold, crystalline. We emerged onto a rocky shelf above the tree line. The Absaroka range spreading out in every direction under a sky so thick with stars it looked like a digital fabrication. The moon was half full, casting silver light across snowfields and granite ridges. No infected. Not at this elevation. Not tonight. Emery stood at the tunnel mouth and looked up at the sky, his damaged face tilted toward the stars, and the moonlight caught the brown of his eyes, still clear, still present. He breathed the mountain air in slow, labored pulls, and something in his expression shifted. Not peace. He was beyond peace. But recognition. The world still existed. The sky still held stars. The air still tasted of pine and snow and distance. Thank you, he said. Lena checked his pulse again. 32 BPM, slower than before. She opened the insulated case, drew one of the blue vials, loaded a syringe. This might not work, she told him. I know. She administered the injection. Emery closed his eyes. We waited. When he opened them, they were still brown, still human, still grieving, but steadier. It was a start. We made camp on the ridge that night, above the world that had ended, wrapped in thermal blankets from a bunker that should never have existed. Kira got the radio working at dawn. The Mount weather signal was still broadcasting. She changed the frequency and began transmitting, not a response to their request, but an open broadcast. Wren's confession, the project designations, the truth about Site Artemis and Phase 3. I don't know who heard it. I don't know if it mattered. But the signal went out, and it carried across whatever remained of the infrastructure that once connected us, and somewhere, maybe someone with the power to act was forced to listen. Emery survived the night, then the next night, then the next. Lena administered the bridge compound every 12 hours, and each time his speech came easier, his movements more fluid. The war between his mind and the infection tilting fractionally toward his mind. He wasn't cured. He might never be. But he was present, a living testimony to what had been done and what might still be undone. We moved south at sunrise, 5 people and 1 man caught between what he'd been and what they tried to make him. The mountains held us, the dead couldn't climb, and below the world waited for an answer we were only beginning to assemble.